Thank you. A very good evening to all of you here. All of the conversations were very exciting, and this is a very important nexus to discuss agriculture and development. Aligned to this, UNDP and ISA developed a concept note on scaling solar applications for agricultural use. Shreya, I'm unable to see the screen. I'm hoping the participants can still see my presentation. Yes. So as I was saying, with the idea of developing, integrated, inclusive solutions at the nexus of development and climate change, ISA and UNDP developed this project on solar water pumps under one of the ISA priority programs called Scaling Solar Applications for Agricultural Use. The reason why we've chosen this out of the 9 priority programs ISA has is obviously because of the challenges in the agricultural sector as discussed over the last 2 days. Also because when ISA released an expression of interest to its member countries, 22 member countries came back with a total demand of 272,000 solar water pumps. It was because of this, we developed a concept note that was submitted to the IBSA facility, or the India, Brazil, South Africa facility that is based out of the United Nations Office of South-South Cooperation. And the top 10 countries with the most demand was chosen for the pilot phase. Could you please go to the next screen, please?
Shweta. Sorry, I think we are facing an issue with sharing our screen. Every time we try to share it, the Zoom crashes. So it would be...
Sure, maybe I'll share my screen, yeah.
Do it faster and better. Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Can you see it now? Can you see my screen? Okay, I'm going to proceed. I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. So as I was saying, the project is developed for about 10 countries, which are mostly in Africa, with the exception of Tuvalu, which is in the Pacific island. The reason, as I said, that these countries were chosen was because of the large demand for solar water pumps that they had assuaged. The project will be implemented over a period of 2 years with a total grant of $2 million, with the aim to deploy 200 solar water pumps. Although all of these seem like the primary goals, the overarching idea is to set up a modality for South-South cooperation or multi-country programming to achieve 3 main things: to prepare for inclusive institutions and conducive local solar energy markets, to address the increased vulnerabilities that these agricultural communities face, and to ensure sustainability, but also the resilience of these farmers. And that is what solar energy can do in the agricultural community. It is obviously a decentralized tool for climate change mitigation, but more importantly, it is a way to increase the adaptive capacity of these vulnerable producers. The countries that were chosen, as I mentioned earlier, have been drawn out on the map to show you how geographically dispersed they are. Despite this geographic disparity, there are a lot of similarities between the 10 countries. First, agriculture is a very significant contributor of GDP in the countries. While the global GDP contribution of agricultural sector is only 4%, in these countries, it's more than 10%. In Niger, especially, it is as high as 40%. Other factors that these 10 countries have in common is the access to electricity, but access to clean electricity and access to clean, reliable, and affordable electricity. In South Sudan, total access to electricity is only available to 7.2% of the population. These are some of the things, and SDG 7 on clean energy and SDG 1 on no poverty. We'd like to address this. All 10 countries have major challenges in achieving these goals, as in the overarching goals of the SDGs by 2030. Now, why just transition, and why does it apply to Asia? There are 3 things that solar energy or this transition to clean energy can enable in these distributed remote agricultural communities. We can ensure that good governance mechanisms are set in so that the institutions are more inclusive and allow for civic engagement, which means that the demands and the aspirations of the agricultural communities are reflected. And they can also allow for the necessary oversight to ensure that the systems are utilized well. Another very obvious sort of benefit is the social action that it can bring about, the sort of economic opportunities it can enable, the sort of social inclusion it can enable. And the last one is gender equality. This happens to be a big priority for both ISA and for UNDP. And we believe that by equipping women with opportunities for gender responsive services, we could see huge change. The 4 main project components would be a feasibility study. And in addition to what we normally consider the technical and site feasibility assessments, we will be conducting something called the de-risking renewable energy investment study. What this does is it looks at the sort of market barriers and the possible opportunities in the market, and it advises policymakers on how to strengthen policy. It also helps bring convergence between policies of different ministries, say agriculture or renewable energy or electricity. So those are and the aim of doing these studies is to sort of establish a base, sort of strengthen the institutions, as I mentioned earlier, like the governance systems. Yes. The second and the main component of this project is the demonstration project, where we will deploy about 200 solar water pumps. And no, they're not just grant funded. We're looking at various different modalities as inspired by ISA. We will be looking at the community model. We will be looking at the Ethiopia outgrower model. All of these will be tailored to the communities or the beneficiary communities chosen on the ground. And like any project that looks to improve the ecosystem, we'll have significant components on capacity building and knowledge management. This is a rough timeline, and I'm happy to skip this because of the limited time, and I'm sure everybody's tired today. But in brief, as I said, the project will be implemented over 2 years, and we hope to take a phased approach to ensure that learnings from the first few countries is passed on to the second few countries. And ultimately, we help develop this sort of a multi-country modality that is applicable across ISA member countries, Asia included. There are a lot of project stakeholders involved, as you can imagine, in a multi-country project. We have 10 UNDP country offices implementing it in each of the countries. We have ISA national focal points in the government supporting these projects. We have the Sustainable Energy Hub based out of New York that is helping us develop some of these knowledge products and tools that make it easier for policymakers to adopt relevant strategies and methodologies. We are working with international experts and national consultants who will not just do the globally accepted studies, but they will also do ground level assessments and undertake beneficiary consultations to ensure that their needs and demands are incorporated. The deployment, the large deployment, will be done through a very competitive procurement model that first aggregates the demand from the 10 countries with the hope to reduce the cost of individual system. Finally, we have a few solar technology vendors and third-party evaluators to come out and tell us how efficiently the project was implemented on the ground. There are obviously a range of opportunities in such a modality, and which is why we think that this project has implications not just for the project countries, but also for the large agricultural communities spread across the world. First, it sets up a system or an inclusive system for adoption of clean energy. It looks at developing innovative and localized solutions for the countries. It helps to strengthen the local ecosystem and make sure that it's not just solar water pumps that are allowed to grow, but a wide range of solar, distributed solar applications. We hope to establish linkages in countries that have very limited solar market. For example, South Sudan has less than 1% of solar energy penetration. And we'll hope to make linkages of these international vendors with local market players. We'll hope to bring up trainings that will be done in the country, but will build on knowledge from across the world. We will hope to build conducive policies and regulations and inform conducive policies and regulations. And most importantly, we hope to inform government plans on clean energy and climate change mitigation. Globally, This is a model for multi-country projects, and how to leverage clean energy, in this case solar energy, effectively for sustainable development in the global south. As UNDP, we are always focused on achieving our SDGs. We have a target for 2030, and this project addresses several SDGs. SDG 1 to end poverty, SDG 2 to increase food security, which is particularly relevant now with the Russia-Ukraine war. SDG 7 on clean energy, here affordable solar energy. SDG 8 on inclusive and sustainable economic growth. SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production patterns, and SDG 13 on climate change. Thank you. I hope I have kept myself within the time, and I really look forward to questions and suggestions from the participants here.
Thanks a lot, Shweta. So yeah, I definitely kept within the time. We can take some questions for maybe 2 to 3 minutes, and then we will move on to the custodian highlights and the final panel discussion.
Sure.
Does anyone have any comments, any questions? Please go ahead. Is there a mic for? Is there a handheld mic for the questions? You can just ask the question and I will repeat it. Okay.
I think Sachin online has a question.
Okay. Okay. I think Shweta is not able to hear. Wait. Let me just check. Is there a handheld mic? Unko please say दीजिए. Sachin, would you like to go ahead with your question? I think you can unmute yourself and ask.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Shweta, for briefing us about your plans on the project. I might have skipped, just wanted to know when these pilot installations are going to start. That is one thing. And the second, yeah, please go ahead.
No, ask me a second question, I'll ask them together.
Yeah, okay. And second part is have you prepared any digital platform to manage these things? Any digital thing for this project?
So no, we don't have a digital platform, but we are considering a sort of an online system where farmers can ask, not just farmers, but producers and maybe local government institutions can ask us relevant questions on the operations and management of solar infrastructure. That is definitely on the books, but not in this pilot phase. We still need to gather enough data to, sort of build an online mechanism for it. On your first question on when this will start, that's a great question. We will be initiating our feasibility studies actually in 2 days. Yeah.
Great. Nice to hear you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We have another question in the room.
No, so
can you hear him?
Am I audible to her? Can you just check? Am I audible to her?
It's very feeble. If you could repeat it.
So let me ask the question. You can repeat for her.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so my question is, when we are pushing solar, for example, in the rural areas, in the sector of agriculture, in the developing economies, which is present in global south, how much of you think that solar is actually needed in more affluent areas as well? Because if you talk about any technology, for example, if we start with mobile phones, there is a lot of telecommunication access problem in the rural remote areas, but mobile phones started in the urban locations where the uncertainties could be observed. And then the scale of production increased, cost of production went down, and it organically penetrated to the rural areas. We don't have to do nothing special to promote it in the rural areas. Well, in case of solar, when we are finding 50% of, so far my limited experience goes, half of the installations not working after a few years because of the lack of supply chain, lack of manpower, lack of other kinds of infrastructural issues. So is it a good idea, first of all, to push solar in the rural areas the way UNDP and other international organizations are doing? Thank you.
Was that clear, Shweta?
Yes, it was. Let me actually answer that. That's a great question as to why we are aiming these projects at the rural agricultural sector is because they are the most vulnerable ones. They are the ones facing the challenges that are not just climate change related, but also development related. And these solutions, as they are grant funded, we would like to benefit the rural facility. You're absolutely right. There are evidences of projects not sustaining in the future. And that is why we have built large components on capacity building. We also have components on exposure visits, and capacity building is not just for technical O&M, but it's also for sustainable agricultural practice accompanied with it. And let me add one more point. Why solar is so important for these communities is because solar water pumps is a sort of a known technology, but their solar-based applications for livelihoods and productive use has the capacity to enable a sort of mitigation that is driven from rural India, right? That is driven from these remote communities who always get left behind. So that is
Go through all of the custodian highlights. So may I request the custodians to come down and you can just take it on one by one. So let me share the screen. Sorry. We only have about 3 minutes. Yeah. So each person gets 3 to 5, but we'll reduce it to 3. You have about 5 points and okay. Oh, please don't crash again. Sorry? Yes. Can the custodians please come and sit on stage so that it'll be faster that you guys can go through this? Okay, where is... I think we're going to get off Zoom because it's
we can't expect this Bengal water machine to keep producing, keep recharging for the longer period. Then this presentation was followed by a presentation for Professor Sarkar from Miranda House, Delhi University, who analyzed the Bangladesh, the importance of groundwater for the Bangladesh. Just wrapping up. Importance of groundwater for the Bangladesh, and what are the factors starting 1970s, which policy measures have led to this exponential increase that has helped Bangladesh be food security and food secure. And the question is, with the Groundwater Management Act that has come in 2018, that put a number of restrictions in licensing, where will we go in the future? And lastly, Nahid from NGO Forum and I presented our study results from the Bangladesh, where we are looking at the impact of solar on groundwater, whether the solar farmers are pumping more or less. And from the preliminary results, we found that there is no significant difference between solar and diesel farmers as for now. So yeah, that was the main key takeaways. I've mentioned all the name of the presenters, so please get in touch with them if you have any more questions. Thank you.
It's really slow.
Hi, everyone. My name is Labisha. I'm going to go towards a more generic bird's eye view of the presentations rather than picking out points from each and every presentation. So essentially, I think all of the presentations that we had for solar energy for agriculture, income and livelihood sessions, they agreed that the agriculture sector offers this important scope for transitioning towards clean energy, not just in India, but in a number of countries in South Asia, including Nepal and Bangladesh. So the potential of solar for these presentations, they were usually twofold. One was to change the behavior for farmers from transitioning from either diesel or electric to SIPs. And the other was to enable irrigation where there were limited options or relying predominantly on diesel irrigation. And the presentations also looked at connecting SIP to livelihood options and income. So they looked at agri-value chains and the production cluster as a whole, rather than only looking at SIP as one technology to be deployed. Secondly, several models were discussed. There were institutional models, for example, the Nepal subsidy model, which is a 60% subsidy on SIPs, the PM Kusum, which is trying to decarbonize farms and trying to reduce the subsidy burden on discoms, and permit and regulatory models, for example, the Upazilla model of Bangladesh, where you have to apply for licenses for irrigation. Then there were other innovations such as the solar pump decision support tool, which is trying to generate more evidence for groundwater markets, among other things. Essentially, at the core of it, I think the presenters were trying to understand how to change the model of farmer behavior, how to get them to change from their existing irrigation practice to what we think is a more climate-friendly irrigation option. But what are the kinds of effects this could have? For example, moving to a grid-connected SIP model could enable lesser water markets and more selling of electricity. And that would reduce the access of water markets to maybe smaller or marginal farm holders as well. So that could have a disincentive that way. And another important question that was raised in the discussion is, what is the farmer profile that we are actually talking about when we talk about SIP access, SIP benefits, etc.? Because usually we see that we treat farmers as a homogeneous group when this is not correct at all. They are a heterogeneous group, and particularly in countries like Nepal, where male mobility is massive, the predominant farmer right now in the fields is women. So we need to think of these aspects of inclusion and equity when we think about SIPs as well. And I would like to conclude with that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I will make the shortest presentation here and save on time. And I've got. So, so we had an interesting session, which was on essentially scaling up of off-grid SIPs in smallholder agriculture, which is a very interesting topic because it took in considerations of equity, what sort of aspects of SIPs, promotes elite capture, and how can we sort of scale up in a way where we can ensure that there's more equity in access. So the idea was to focus on not just the problems, but also potential solutions and varied models which currently exist, where people have tried different ways in ensuring that access is improved. So one of those solutions was discussed as multiple business models for enabling access that farmers themselves have taken on, such as fee for service, different kinds of ownership patterns, group ownership, etc. Policy provisions was discussed in terms of the requirement of course, large subsidies, private capital, and flexibility within the policies to enable different kinds of ownership models rather than just individual ownership. That is linked also. So that was two. Third one that was discussed was to look at SIPs, not just in terms of the cost incurred, but also in terms of the co-benefits that, farmers can gain in the long term. And therefore you sort of offset costs and benefits in that way and look at access, improved access in the long term. So whether that's lower irrigation charges over 20 years, land savings from different kind of models of underground pipes, etc. Then we had one very interesting study on, 10 different kinds of case studies and of varied permutations of ownership, where each farmer has found their own ways and, permutations, combinations of ownership. Some own their own land, but not the pump. Somebody owns tube well, but not the pump. Somebody has a pump, but has no land and just leases out tube well. So there, women, SHGs have come together to own SIPs. So there have been varied permutations. So sort of promoting these more, informal nexus ideas to improve ownership and improve access. So there's aspects of portability, reliability of equipment, capacity of pumps. All of this enables the kind of solutions and the kind of solutions that individual farmers seek out within their capacities. We had one very interesting presentation from Dan, and I have to apologize because Dan suffered similar technical issues of today, but he really pulled off a great presentation and brought out a very important point, which was on underutilization of solar pumps. It was a very key highlight, I thought, from that session, because it brought out not just the fact that solar pumps are underutilized, but the fact that the reasons behind that underutilization are simply not adequately understood yet. Yeah, thank you very much. Is simply not understood, and therefore you start talking about trade-offs and what potential, so whether it's labor availability and costs, whether it's groundwater availability factors that could lead to that, scale of use, are the fields just too small to irrigate, the kind of capacities that people are investing in, equipment maintenance. So there's so many questions that kind of open up for further research in terms of what could really explain this underutilization irrespective of rainfall or season. And finally, the fact what came out was that elite capture does continue to remain an issue, and is something that when it comes to scaling up, we will really have to take on. Increase the awareness of local governments and farmers about schemes, about what are the positives and negatives of, what are the trade-offs, what are the opportunities of this technology, how to sort of sustain subsidies in the long term. So this is the highlights that I will present, and I will now hand over to technical session 5.
Thank you. I'm Kopal, and our session was quite heavy, making energy transition inclusive and justice. So Professor Jim talked about how procedural justice in just transition framework planning through community involvement and evidence from the ground. So he's chairing the Scotland Just Transition Framework, and he has included all the principles of just transition and how he's working from capacity building to reskilling to other aspects of just transition, talking to people, the communities, and building that procedural justice aspect into the just transition framework. Then I spoke about just transition from distributive justice principle, understanding the district level cost and benefit, understanding at district level how the transition of energy is impacting and how these districts are vulnerable to specifically coal transition. Then Professor Joyshri spoke about gender equity and transition framework from demand side mitigation measures, and which may lead to interconnected subsystems in the transitions. Dr. Manohara from AIT spoke about policy analysis. They have done a varied policy analysis at different country level, where they looked into gender sensitivity and inclusion in the transition, and how these policies address these issues and if they are included. So many of them were not found as gender sensitive and gender blind, in fact. Then there was a panel discussion where making energy transition inclusive and equitable must have the following elements. The panel together discussed on, and the following elements came through: making just transition the mainstream discussion. There has to be a mainstream discussion on just transition where dialogues must happen at the implementation level. And there's considering the local issues and the contextual issues of just transition, not only at the global level. Talking about procedural transformation that requires working with the people at the local level, at the ground level. Also looking at energy transition through human perspective and developmental lens, rather than just talking about mitigation and emission measures. So that's it. Thank you.
And the final session highlights is from Shishir. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So I just wanted to present a bird's eye view of what happened in the session, just to give you a general idea, and I'll try to finish in 3 minutes. So basically the session, we focused on like what our 7 Solar Innovation Fund grantee did over the last few years. Back in 2020 and 2021, we had this Solar Innovation Fund that we awarded to like 7 grantees for their innovative ideas based around solar irrigation. So geographic location wise, there were 4 Innovation Fund grantee from India, that is mainly working in Bihar, Odisha, Rajasthan, Jharkhand, and West Bengal. And there was 1 Solar Innovation Fund grantee from Pakistan that's working in Punjab, Balochistan, Sindh, and KPK. And in Nepal, there are 2 Solar Innovation Fund grantee that's basically working in southern part of Tarai Plains. So I just categorize these intervention into 3 categories. The technical intervention, right? For example, PARC from Pakistan, they are working with this responsive drip irrigation system that is using solar irrigation. That's the whole idea, is to basically reduce the cost of solar if you require the less water for irrigation. Power, on the other hand, they are working with a lot of stuff. One of them is this innovative remote monitoring system that they have developed in-house, and that uses agri-processing for agro-advisory services. Karma is the other grantee that's working in Bihar and Jharkhand, and they are basically working with this mobile flexible panels that's probably building a water interdependent model around it. Sini, they are working with this tribal people in Jharkhand that's basically want to utilize the wasted energy from solar irrigation pump to basically address local challenges there, because the people, they want to have a agro-processing mechanism in their area. So they are using basically the wasted energy to install agro-processing to probably improve the livelihood of the people there. Financial intervention wise, I think Switchon has a very good idea of this revolving fund, where they have this revolving fund which provide access to finance to these women farmers, which otherwise these larger banks couldn't provide loan to access this solar irrigation pump technology. Campower is also working with microfinancing institution to finance this solar irrigation pump. They are also doing lots of demonstration to promote solar irrigation in areas where AEPC has no penetration at the moment. Minergy also is intervening with digital payment system in the project. Social intervention wide, Urmil is doing a great job with green fooders in a desert environment and trying to address the whole value chain around it. And Minergy is also solving this water distribution problem in installing energy meter and initiating this volumetric payment system. Thank you. I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay, so that was the key highlights for today. And we will now move into the closing panel discussion, and I will hand it over to Shilp. The discussions on the main takeaways from day one and thinking ahead on phase 2.
Okay, hi everyone, good evening. I hope all of you still have some energy left. If not, say yes. Okay, let me invite the panelists here. Professor Shah, Divya. We also have Nazmun Karim from BARC and Pratignya Mishra from NARMIN. Okay, I promise that I will keep asking very simple questions, which will have very short answers. But I would also like, if we have time in the end, to ask the same questions to the audience so that we can get more inputs on these two very important points. The first question to the panelists is, I would like you to give 3 bullet points, key takeaways from today, from your perspective. So can we start with you, ma'am? I think we need some mics.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And I would like to share some of the ideas that I have collected over here. And I would like to share some of the instances that about Nepal, marching into the federal structure. The Constitution of Nepal 2015 provides 22 exclusive political and administrative rights to the local governments with the objective to cater efficient service deliveries near to the doorsteps of people, where the local governments are entitled to develop all the policies and legal instruments. That's why the 3 takeaways that we can take from here are not only the 3 takeaways, there are so many examples that have been depicted by international delegates over here. So while devising inclusive policy instruments and while devising various programmatic interventions and for developing the capacities of the local government, especially in the case of local leaderships as Nepal, in Nepal, it's been running in its 6 years of federalism, and it is the second tenure of the new local leaderships. That's why we do have a lot of potentialities to support our local leaders to develop and devise such inclusive energy policies and energy sector development programs from here. Thank you.
Aditi, can we have the next round? Do you want to have a conversation in Bangla, and Aditi can help translate for the audience, please?
In this energizing agriculture and enabling just energy transition in South Asia, in this plenary session 2, that is 6 technical sessions, presented summary report. I think is the first technical session, that is I made choice, that is I think capacity building of technicians and also farmers is required for SIP program. And also we have to manage that is for technical session 2, that is we heard that is no significant difference between solar and non-solar groundwater abstraction. In this, I think we have to manage that is aquifer recharge, that is replacement is needed. And also we have to use water savings technologies. That is we have to manage water that is sustainably. So we have to use that is water savings technology. I think this. And also for technical session 3, I think that is feasibility study is needed for different model, that is financial models for farmers' behavior. And also that that is feasibility study is needed. And also technical session 4, subsidy is needed because farmers in South Asia, that is most of the farmers are poor or marginal farmer. So subsidies is needed for that is taking that SIP for SIP progress or disseminate. And also needed that is increase, we have to increase awareness of the farmers for energy uses. And also technical session 5, policy analysis is needed. And technical session 6, that is innovation, that is we saw that is different countries have innovated technologies. So we have to disseminate this technology, that is drip irrigation, remote monitoring and agri-sensors, mobile SIP with flexible panels, and utilization of wasted energy for SIP for agro-processing and digital payment. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Divya, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shilp. First of all, I think I really want to thank everybody. People have traveled from far and wide to join us today, sharing their learnings. So really very grateful to everyone here. I think the good news for me, the biggest learning is that the situation today is wonderful. A decade ago, we were still talking about very, very small experiments, small pilots here and there. Today, we are talking about very large schemes, so the technology itself is getting mainstream. So that's fantastic, especially in South Asia. So that's one big learning already for me. The fact that today we sit about here and talk about energizing agriculture and just energy transition is a big, big step. And that's very positive. Another important step is that we have moved now from technology orientation towards actually talking about second generation questions now about impact on groundwater, about viability, about equity concerns. That is also, for me, a big learning in itself. And it's not just us, it's not just the solar project that's looking at it, but there are many other partners and agencies who are looking at these same topics. So that is also a very positive development that, this space is already evolving as we go forward. A lot of research is underway. Of course, one can always say you can make it more comprehensive by doing a lot more research, but I think the time is ripe now where we start consolidating some of this research, developing that into policy pieces and, taking it forward and placing in front of people who make policies, and I think that will be something for us to look forward to doing. So that's the version 2 of Regional Forum, where we will have many more policymakers joining us. But thank you so much.
Sir.
I have this following 3 takeaways. I think that that I mean, based on the experience that we have so far and the research that was presented today, I think that the role that solar irrigation will play will be distinct in Western India and much of Pakistan, especially Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, versus the role that it will play in Eastern India and in Nepal, Tarai, and in Bangladesh. I think that in Western India, the role of solar energy will be much more in terms of unlocking the energy, water, food nexus. I don't think that solar energy will have a profound livelihood impact or agricultural impact as we expect it to have in Eastern India. So I think the nature of the role that that introduction of solar energy will play, especially if we have more of the sky kind of thing, then its major impact will be in terms of reducing agricultural subsidies and so on and so forth. But I don't think expansion, big ticket expansion in irrigation will occur just because we have solar energy there. In Eastern India, Bangladesh and Nepal, Tarai, on the other hand, I think the impact of solar energy will be much more in terms of livelihoods, improving access to poor farmers, to tenant farmers, and so on and so forth. So that's my point number 2, that in Eastern India, in Ganga Basin especially, the solar irrigation will play a far more important role in promoting agricultural livelihoods and improved irrigation and irrigated productivity of irrigated agriculture. But I think the main highlight from today's research is that solar energy may really not be sustainable in Eastern India. It may actually be more sustainable economically in Western India than in Eastern India, unless we can ramp up the average utilization of solar pumps to something like 1,200 to 1,300 hours a year. A solar pump will be far more expensive than a diesel pump. A diesel pump that you can buy off in 15,000 rupees, if you use it for just 150 to 200 hours, it's okay. But a solar pump that costs you 5 lakh rupees, if you're going to use that only for 250 hours, 50 hours, as one presentation from Nepal we heard today, but then you're talking about per hour cost of 300 rupees. And right now you're able to afford it just because 90% of that is subsidized. You're not paying the capital cost of that. But that cannot go on forever. At some stage, somebody is going to pull the rug underneath your feet, and farmers will have to start paying, increasing or the full cost of the solar pump. And then will they be really willing to put that kind of money in solar pump technology? So I think the real question that I think phase 2 should really investigate is, why is it that in some villages of Bihar, the average solar pump operates for 600 hours, and in the neighboring village, there are groups that own solar pumps who operate only for 250 hours. So the range of operating factor that you find in Eastern India solar pumps is huge. And there are a number of factors, some of which we discussed today, that groundwater conditions, cost of labor, availability of labor, the development of water market is a very important, it leverages the operating factor of solar pumps. The ease with the investment in buried pipe, the difference between having a buried pipe versus distributing water using flexible delivery pipe makes a difference of 200 hours to 300 hours per year, simply because a farmer who owns a solar pump, he has just 6 or 8 hours in a day to do his business. And within the 8 hours a day, if he has to spend 2 hours in folding and unfolding pipes, then you are actually taking very precious time away from him. So there are factors like this that we need to work on, which can ramp up the average operating factor of a solar irrigation pump, which may have a decisive impact on the viability of this technology in Eastern India. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm open to taking a few key takeaways from the audience. I'll take 3 maximum, but each one can only say 1. So if you have any takeaway that you haven't heard so far, but you strongly feel about, please raise your hand, or I'll force some people to volunteer. Ram, come on. There. Okay.
Yes, one important aspect will be standardized systems that we need to
set standards for the solar water pumping system and providing financial incentives for promotion of SIPs. Thank you. There was Ram here. Go ahead, and after that, Ram.
Okay. If farmers are already using electric pumps, what is the necessity to move them to solar? Because if emissions are the issue that you're trying to tackle, maybe then we should clean up our grid instead of asking them to switch. So what is the argument for? Is there an argument to make even electric pumps change to solar?
I think that's the water energy food nexus argument that the farmers who are currently using electric pumps are basically consuming anywhere between $15 to $20 billion of subsidy every year. And they are given these energy either free of cost or highly subsidized, and it creates perverse incentives for pumping too much groundwater. Now, can solar pumps play a role in reducing these subsidies and also fixing these perverse incentives? If yes, then yes. Otherwise, you're right. I mean, if we are polarizing at the point of generation, then their energy transition will happen automatically. Ram?
I just would have liked to request the UNDP speaker, who unfortunately is off, to design their project in a way that can advance our understanding along the lines of the questions that were raised just now. Because the way the governments usually, as we heard today, the way the governments seem to be deploying these pumps are problematic in many ways, including in terms of our ability to understand the impacts and all those dynamics. So I see that Shweta is back.
Shweta is online, so if she wants to add something quickly.
So one request is go from 200 to 2,000 or 20,000 pumps, please. And the second request is really do it in a way that can help us improve our understanding of the frontier of the questions.
Noted, and it's completely, we are planning on scaling it, but we want to start out slow so we ensure that the mechanisms are defined. We want to make sure that how the feasibility study is done or the de-risking study is done, that is standardized, so it's easier to replicate and adapt. And yes, all of the suggestions from today, I have my colleague and implementation partner, Mr. PC Sharma there, who has been taking active notes, and I'm sure all of this will be included.
Okay, Aditi, you want to add something?
I was in the Just Transition session, and something that struck me is that if you want to, basically those who will lose out from this energy transition are not the necessary ones who would gain from renewable energy, right? I mean, those who are losing out are mostly in the Eastern India, for instance, and much of the gain of this is happening in Western India. So it's very kind of similar to our water situation also. I mean, in Western India, we already have overexploitation, but we are getting renewable energy. But in Eastern India, where we have relatively more water resources, we aren't quite doing very well. But when you look at the overall energy transition away from coal, is the eastern states that are going to be most affected. So I think that none of these fair transition will happen automatically. So how do you actually make these energy transitions fair in a planned way is something I think we should tackle in the next phase. And for me, important part there is that the analysis that Manohara ji has done on the policies. She has looked at agriculture, water, and energy policies. And policies are kind of, at least in words, they are much more gender, either gender transformative or gender responsive when it comes to agriculture and water. But renewable energy policies are still being seen as a technology issue, is being seen as a technical problem. So why do we need, I mean, it took us a long time to make our agriculture policies gender sensitive. It took us 50 years. So should it take another 50 years to make our energy policies gender sensitive and inclusive? So I think that's something it needs to be tackled, that why aren't the renewable energy policies at all, gender, or equity focused?
Okay, Nitin.
Thanks, Shilp. No, I think one important point which I see is being made is, to consider different agroecologies. I think this is very important. I mean, whether it's the western part of the Asia or the eastern side of it. I think one more thing that, we are trying to generate evidence on those aspects is to also see what is not working. I mean, especially if we look at PM Kusum, why is it like only 300,000 odd pumps have been adopted against 35 million that were, planned? I think there is a need to also look at those aspects and try to then come out with the options which can scale up either it's PM Kusum in India or elsewhere, whatever is the name of the scheme, or whosoever wants to adopt it, because it is important to know that as well.
Absolutely. Just the plan was 3.5 million, but it should be 35 million. You're right. Okay, unless there are any other, Sonal, please.
Yeah, I just, from my experience in the groundwork, the fieldwork that we did for Sky, there are many people who go for SIPs because the electricity connections are not forthcoming. There's a long queue for getting an electricity connection. So SIPs can also solve the equity issues in this sense, that they can, they can electrify the pumps which are otherwise not going to get in. So that is another aspect which we overlook. Again, even those who are already having electricity connections, there again, power outages are so common. So if they become solarized, then they think that they are now independent of the vagaries of the grid. So that itself is something that, solves the equity issue. That's what I feel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. My next question to the panel is actually, we've already started talking about it. What should the next phase of solar look at? Maybe one key point each of you can reflect on. So can we start with you?
Well, I think in water abundant, electricity short areas, I think the central question is how can you make solar pumps, even with subsidy, financially viable? How do you create a situation in which governments want to keep on subsidizing? As long as the subsidy is rational, I guess public agencies would keep putting money. But the moment it becomes clear that you are actually just burning money on a technology that would not sustain on its own, people would gradually lose interest in that. So how do you handle that question if there is so much of evidence that SIPs produce productivity, equity impacts, which are so critical? In Western India, I think the critical question that we need to investigate in the next phase is how exactly can introduction of solar energy help us to reduce the groundwater anomalies, the perverse subsidies, energy subsidies, and all the distortions that is created over the past 40, 50 years. Can we really bring back the situation in the 1960s, when we first started subsidizing electricity and all the ill effects that have come with that? I think that should be the central focus of history.
I think I sort of started on that already, which was now sort of, consolidating the research and bringing it in front of the policymakers, getting them to have this dialogue about the nexus, how one policy actually has implications on the other sectors and decisions made there. So that's one piece. Second is that South Asia, we know that one size doesn't fit all. We've seen that. There are beautiful models which are working. Yes, there are some that don't work. So there are learnings there as well. But then can we now take our learnings to other parts of the world and leapfrog their learning journeys so that, they can avoid, like what Ram was saying, can UNDP already start, embedding some of the learnings from South Asia to make sure that we can cut short the learning period for that, other regions and already stop, avoid making some of the mistakes and, take on that. I think that's where some of our focus will be perhaps in the next phase, but it's yet to be decided.
I think that is not to pressurize the SIP uses for marginal farmers and poor farmers. I think maybe category we select we choose categories and categories wise we may subsidies selection criteria may be needed. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I wish for more evidence-based database with a combination of research and development initiatives as well, and frequent dialogue sessions among regional platforms and international platforms so that we can learn from various international practices as well, and the efficient management and efficient delivery of all the initiatives that directly support the livelihoods of most vulnerable communities. Thank you.
Shiv, if I may come in too.
Yes.
Hi, so I think two important things that UNDP is looking at, and I would love to get suggestions, is on how to build effective governance mechanisms to make sure that the deployment is accessible and inclusive at the last mile. And the second, not to sound like a broken record, but we need to aggregate demand so we can access low-cost financing. We need to start mainstreaming this, moving beyond subsidies. And finally, to assuage everyone's concerns, we are building on the globally available knowledge. We have taken about 15 odd business models that were applicable from across a global database, and we've shortlisted them based on the applicability in these countries. And please do reach out to me with more suggestions. We're always looking for it.
Thanks, Shweta. I think we'll close the discussion now here because I know everybody is tired and we want to go out. And